morning, everyone, and welcome to this scheduled meeting of the Legal Committee. I'd like to welcome everybody here today in attendance, but especially to our new SPA board members, Chris Cregan and Pauline Howie. Very special welcome to you who've both joined the Legal Committee. So it's lovely to see you here, and just ask questions as you go, I'm sure, as we get through the business. There'll be lots of questions, but welcome to you both. I have apologies this morning from Tom Halpin. Do we have any other apologies, Colette, to note?
No other apologies, Chair.
No other apologies, perfect. So if I could just ask members now if there's any interest they'd like to declare before we start.
No.
No, okay, smashing. Regarding decisions since our last meeting, in accordance with Section 20 of the SPA Standing Orders, we took a decision in private on both the 10th of June and also the 9th of July regarding ongoing legal matters. And with regards to today's meeting, in accordance again with our Section 20 of our Standing Orders, I'd like to invite you to approve taking items 6 to 9 in private. Everyone content with that? Smashing. Okay, thank you. So on to the minutes now, item 2. I'm just going to ask, is everyone content to approve these minutes as recorded? Anyone want to question anything? No? I think it's only going to be Grant anyway, isn't it? It was here the last time. So yes, so I'm looking at you, Grant. So smashing.
Yes, I was only going to comment on one of the private minutes section, but that comes later.
Smashing. Okay, thanks, Grant. That takes us on to paper number 3, and at this I'm going to hand over to James. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. Can I first of all apologise because I look as if I'm in a witness protection programme. I have a large window behind me, and even the watery sun in Glasgow seems to create a silhouette, so I apologise for that. The paper itself is a standing paper that I bring to every board. This was asked for by the SPA committee a couple of years ago. And what the aim is to show the settlements that Police Scotland have entered into under the grounds of employers' liability, public liability and motor vehicle claims. What normally happens is that you have a running total of the financial year running alongside it, but as I'm reporting on the first quarter, obviously the financial year's figures will mirror exactly those of the first quarter. In the employer's liability field, we settled 16 cases at a total cost of £304,535, giving an average of 19,033. Members who have been on this committee for a while will know that that figure represents one settlement at just over 225,000. And I can address more of that in the private session. So what these tables tend to show is that one case can skew quite significantly the amount that we pay out and the average that we pay. The 15 of the employer liability cases were settled at 78,000 with an average of £5,200. In the public liability area, again, we settled 16 cases at a global cost of £20,859. This represents a significantly lower figure than we're used to, and that's as a result of when cases come to be settled. There's no science to it. It will depend very much on the facts of a case. But in the first quarter, we settled 16 cases at just under 21,000. If that's extrapolated over the financial year, that would come out at a public liability of just over £80,000. I would have to say to members that I certainly wouldn't be putting the kettle on for those figures. The figures over the previous years would have public liability sitting at around about £1 million. So the first quarter obviously represents a bit of a left field figure, given that the entire settlement there is £21,000. With motor claims, 73 cases settled at a global cost of £276,325. This is roughly in line with what we've seen over the previous years. And as I say, at every single committee, although 73 cases being settled may look, extraordinarily high, cognizance has to be taken to the fact that the Police Scotland have motor vehicles on the roads throughout the entire country, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and 24 hours a day. The nature of the driving that's involved, you would assume would lead to more bumps and prangs, officers alighting from cars at speed, not properly applying the handbrake, the car then rolling into a garden fence, that type of thing happens. However, what I would say is that the motor claims settlements are roughly in line with what we have seen over the last 5 years. Slightly higher in costs, just for perhaps the benefit of the new members. What we have found is that in the last 18 months or so, the cost of rental of vehicles has gone up quite starkly. The cost of parts for cars has gone up significantly, and the amount of time that is required to get parts to fix vehicles has increased, which therefore has a compound issue with the fact that people need to be provided with hired cars for longer. And so although the figures are up last year and the start of this year, there are real world reasons for that. It is not as a result of more prangs or worse accidents being involved in. It's simply an illustration of the fact that things are just more expensive now than they were perhaps in 2020 and 2021. So with that, Chair, I'm more than happy to stop there and to take any questions any members may have on the statistics report.
Many thanks, James. That's been great. I just wonder, in terms of questions, Grant, I'm going to open up to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. James, thank you very much. That's a very helpful and clear report. There's one thing that I'm a bit puzzled about, and it's the right-hand column of the percentage of the financial year. I know it's explained in 2.4 that this is to show the settlement figures, the percentage of the settlement figures within the current financial year, but I'm not sure the way it's expressed, the way they all come through is 100%. Will it ever be anything other than 100%? I was sort of imagining that the intention there was to find out the percentage within the budget or something, but I just don't quite understand the 100% everywhere. Perhaps you could explain.
Yes, I will. The first quarter of this year is obviously mirrors exactly the amount that's come out of this financial budget. So the next report that you have will be reporting on quarter 2, and let's say if we just took a public liability case where all 100% of our settlements are below £0 to £75,000, but let's say that we have to settle something at £175,000, that would go into the third column, and it would then represent a different percentage. So the 100 would no longer be the case because we now have a case settled that's not within the 0 to 75k. If you think that there is a better way to do this, I'm all ears.
Right, no, I think I can now.
Yeah, this table represents what the committee asked for probably about 18 months ago. But the difficulty with this table, Grant, is it shows that 100% of public liability settlements have been below the 75,000 mark, and it's to illustrate to members as we go through the financial year that although a gross figure might be over £1 million, it represents 40% of the amount that we've paid out in public liability, for example. So it's not the greatest table for the first quarter, is probably what I'm looking to say, because it really does just reflect what we've done in the last 3 months. But as we go through the financial year, The second table, for want of a better phrase, will start to show what the running financial year costs are, and the percentages at the right-hand side will show you clearly what that settlement represents in terms of the amount of money that has left the department.
Yeah, I think I've got that. It's when I look at the employer's liability claim, you've got 15 in the first category up to 75,000, then you've got one in 150 to 250, but they're both showing 100%. It must be 100% within the category. I'll give that some further thought. Thank you.
More than happy to take any direction on that, but for want of a better phrase, yeah, you've hit the nail on the head.
Right, thank you. I'll reflect on what if I can think of another way of doing it. Thank you very much.
I know, because now you've explained it, James. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think we need to think about that a bit better, don't we? Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
That you, Grant. Thank you.
Yes.
Pauline.
Thanks very much, James, for those introductory comments. Really helpful explanation about whether we expected the Q1 figures to be where they were in comparison to our historical trends, and also in comparison to what perhaps we've budgeted for as well. From my perspective, it would be really helpful if that explanation could be included in the narrative in the paper itself.
Yeah.
And I think what might be really helpful is, rather than having the historical information to the back, if we could, for each of the employer liability claims, the motor claims, the public liability claims, have those presented in line graphs showing the quarterly figures, because then you can see the trend really clearly, and you can comment on in the narrative about what's happening in the latest quarter in comparison to the trend, and what areas that you're looking at further, and what areas of learning that the organisation is taking forward in the future. So I think I'm happy to work with you in terms of the presentation of that. And over time, it would be easy then for the analytics people to put in some control charts, so that we can see whether we're on track or not in comparison to what we've been forecasting.
Absolutely happy to do that, and almost definitely I'll be in touch with you to help me with the presentation. I have to say my IT skills leave a lot to be desired, but if you can show me how to do the graphs and whatnot, I'm a fast learner. But absolutely, if there's better ways that you want this to be displayed, I'm all ears.
No problem.
Thanks, Pauline. Thanks, James, for that. Does anyone else have any questions on this paper? No? Okay, well, we'll move on then to item 4, which is on NDAs, and I'm back to you again, James. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps for the benefit of newer members, in around about 2021, there was a fair amount of stories in the media about the use of non-disclosure agreements, and this attracted some criticism and scepticism about why Police Scotland use non-disclosure agreements. The committee at the time, therefore, to cover its governance responsibilities, asked that I bring a series of reports to committee detailing the use of non-disclosure agreements and the reasons for them. The committee were then satisfied that governance and a strict handle has been kept on the use of non-disclosure agreements, and the committee asked that an annual report then be brought to the committee. This represents the first of those annual reports, and as you can see from the numbers in the report, we used non-disclosure agreements on 7 occasions throughout the last year. Settled 388 cases in the financial year, and the 7 that we used the non-disclosure agreements in represents about 1.7%. That's roughly in line with the numbers that we had when this matter first came to prominence, and the committee started to look into it. What I can say is that of the 7 cases that we did use an NDA in, the NDA was requested by the claimant on 1 occasion, On a further 2 occasions, it was agreed by both parties at judicial mediation to include a non-disclosure agreement, and on 4 occasions, Police Scotland sought the non-disclosure agreement. In those 4 cases, the reason for a non-disclosure agreement was in one case for commercial reasons, and in 3 cases for the protection of employee relations, as the people involved in that claim are still officers or staff with Police Scotland, still work for us, still go to work with other colleagues, and the NDA was put in there to help with any employee relations. What I would say from the outset is that non-disclosure agreements in Court 3s, which is the settlement of employment cases, are an absolute standard clause. They are used every day by organisations settling employment cases. Police Scotland have adopted a policy where we will not use them unless there are good reasons for doing so. If a solicitor wishes an NDA to be inserted, or indeed gets instructions from a client department that an NDA should be inserted, there has to be good legal reasons for doing that. It has to be kept in a register in my room, which I oversee, and basically there's a pro forma in place where you have to provide the necessary justification. All solicitors and all external solicitors that we instruct are aware that our starting position is that we do not use non-disclosure agreements where possible, but we do recognise that there are cases where there are perfectly legitimate and perfectly legal use of a legal tool, and we use them in line with all other organisations or private bodies up and down the country. I would say that the 1.7% suggests that we do not use them routinely. However, they are used, but as I say, I have been absolutely satisfied that where they have been used, it's for good reason. I would also perhaps state at this stage that if the other side are seeking an NDA, we will never take issue with that. It's a matter for them. If they wish the matter to be subject to a non-disclosure agreement, we will agree to it. But from the 7 cases where we used them in the last year, only 1 was asked for by the claimant. We asked for 4. But as I say, I'm satisfied that in those 4 cases, there were good, lawful, legitimate reasons for doing so. Can I also further stress that no NDA that the police enter into prevents anything lawful or prevents anything like whistleblowing. It is usually just the amount of money that's been paid that's subject to the NDA, or the fact that a settlement has been entered into for specific grounds. I hope that the report continues to provide the committee with comfort that NDAs are firstly not being used willy-nilly, and that secondly there is tight governance on their use, and that will continue to be the case. But I'll stop there and happy to answer any questions.
Smashing, thanks James. Committee members, Pauline, questions?
Yeah, thanks very much, James. Again, a really helpful report. 7 cases in proportion to the overall number of claims settled obviously is very low, but I guess if you exclude the motor claims as a proportion of the employer liability claims, it actually pushes up quite high percentages. And therefore, accepting what you're saying in terms of there is a presumption against the use of these NDAs. I guess what I'm looking for is about assurance around compliance with the ACAS guidance and with the Scottish Public Finance Manual, who are very specific in both those pieces of guidance around the use of NDAs, and how do we track that? For example, ACAS has, I think, about 5 bullet points around the use of NDAs. Do we have a kind of log that we're satisfied against each element of those? And I guess a follow-up question is if the majority of the NDAs are to do with employer liability claims and ETs more specifically, how are we taking forward any learning from that process?
Yeah, I'll go to your ACAS point first. Every single employment lawyer in the department is aware of the criterion that ACAS set out for the use of NDAs, and I can confirm that in every single case we follow the ACAS guidance. As I say, our NDA, the starting position is that we don't use them, and what we also do is ensure that any clause that's inserted makes it very clear that it will comply with all ACAS guidance and that it does not prevent anything lawful or prevent whistleblowing. They're quite distinct on what it is that's subject to the NDA. So I'm utterly satisfied. As I say, there's a log kept in a register here in my room with the justification sheet in each and every case as to why an NDA has been put in place and what it covers and what the clause says. So I am satisfied that in each and every case, firstly, the ACAS criterion is all followed, and secondly, that there is nothing contained within these clauses that prevents anything protected by law or anything to do with whistleblowing. The clauses simply take that out. With regard to organisational learning, the NDA in and of itself is clearly something that's protected, but any learning will still be a matter of record for the instructing department. So, for example, if we have a case from Aberdeen, the instructing department will be the divisional commander at Aberdeen, or perhaps P&D. What would happen in these cases is that they would still be subject to any learning being highlighted and filtered through the appropriate channels, whatever they may be, and they are still capable of appearing before the CARP. So the fact that something is subject to an NDA should not, in my view, have any negative impact on any organisational learning that comes from that particular case.
Pauline, are you happy with that? Yeah, no further questions.
No further questions.
Thanks. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, James, for a very helpful report and introduction. I too was interested in the issue of alignment with the ACAS Code of Practice. I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about that in relation to the justification in relation to employee relations and alignment with the ACAS Code of Practice, and also if you could say something about the other justification which appears there, which is around commercial reasons.
Yeah, what I'll do is if it's okay with you, I'll maybe discuss the commercial reasons first, as it's probably the most simple to understand. What we have found is that certain legal firms get a roaring trade from taking on cases against Police Scotland. And what we further found is that offers of settlement in particular cases become commercially sensitive, as firm A, for example, may advise their client that a settlement at £10,000 is appropriate and that it should be taken. Firm B, however, might be aware that they've done cases in the past where they have managed to achieve £15,000 for their clients. Now, if it becomes public knowledge that we have in the past gone to £15,000, then you can take it to the bank that nobody is looking to settle with us at £10,000 going forward. So what that NDA would reflect is there's to be non-disclosure of the amount of the settlement. What it doesn't prevent is anything else that may arise that's lawfully protected or for whistleblowing and whatnot. It's simply the amount that's been paid, and that's to protect the organisation from a commercial position. With regards to the preservation of employee relations, I touched on this in the introduction. It's simply to protect ongoing employee relations, in as much as if I were to sue my employer, however, I continue to remain here, work here, it's difficult, or it can create a difficulty for people if they are working in a department, for example, and everybody knows what happened and how much they got. What it doesn't do, again, is interfere with any of the criterion under the ACAS guidelines, nor does it prevent anything like whistleblowing. It simply says both parties will adhere to, we're not going to disclose the amount of money that was paid out in a particular case. That's the ethos behind the preservation of employee relations. And as I say, in the 3 cases where we used those, I was satisfied that there existed good grounds for doing that.
Thanks, James. Thank you. That's all for now, Chair. Thank you.
Is that you? Is that you, Chris?
Thanks.
Thanks, James, for that. Does anyone have any other questions on this paper? No? In which case, then let's move on to item 5, which is committee sort of reflections over the last year and also our priorities for the year ahead. Now, I don't know whether, does anyone want to talk to this, or do you want me just to kind of run through? I'm quite happy. I know you've been doing power work on it, Robin and Susan, so I don't know whether anyone's talking it or whether I just go through, run through. I just do that.
I'm happy either way, Chair.
Well, do you want to do it? Because you've done all the work, so.
Sure, no problem. The cover paper points out that all committees of the SPA have been asked to produce longer and shorter term priorities. So as well as some brief reflections on the work of the committee last year, the paper also includes on the left of the kind of last slide 3 longer term priorities, and on the right 3 shorter term priorities. As Caroline says, a first draft of these was produced late last week, and that was discussed with the committee chair earlier this week, and the changes that we agreed at that time now form part of the version that members have before them. I won't read out the priorities in full, but all of them fall broadly into the categories of learning from litigation, improved data allowing enhanced oversight, the financial impact of litigation, and also a more holistic approach to dealing with requests to approve the settlement of litigation. I think all members here today have now been involved in cases of that kind, and have benefited from not just inputs from legal services at Police Scotland, but also from wider staff and officers who can talk to things like learning and the financial impact of settlements. And so one of the priorities there is to try and formalise that, and to try and make sure that in future all consideration of settlements in cases benefit from that wider input. I'll pause there, but happy to answer any questions.
I think you're spot on there, Robin. And I think looking at the sort of priorities and how we've worded them, it's making sure we have the right people in the room at the committee to be able to have that holistic view of the business. Just given the fact that finance is a big part of it, and also organisational learning as well. So it's making sure we have the right people in the room at these committees to get this holistic view of the legal business. So So I'm just going to throw it open now because you've all had a chance to read this. If anyone has any questions, or because this is our opportunity to firm this up in advance of the board meeting coming up. Grant.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to comment that I very much support the idea of having someone from finance at each of our meetings. Some of the board members may not know that I was asked to have a review of the draft annual report and accounts for 2023-24, which contains an awful lot of information about legal provisions and how they're settled and so on. And I think it would be actually quite helpful in future meetings of the committee to have a sort of update as to where we are in relation to what is already in the public domain in our annual report and accounts, but how we're tracking it in relation to our budget and cash payments in the current year as a sort of general item. And I think that would help us understand where we stand.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And also to have that sort of tracking of what we think every quarter is going to settle in terms of money, but also having the grossed up figures as well. Because it's clear that internally we have those figures, but we don't see them as a committee if there is a grossing up to be applied. So I think having greater visibility in a quarter by quarter basis throughout the year of what we think's coming up to settle versus what budget we have allocated to us will enable much more control of the business. So yeah, I don't know whether it's possible for us to take an action for finance to be invited to all future committee meetings. Don't know if that's a possibility, but I'd quite like that to be recorded as an action because I think that would be very helpful. I know we had Angelo the last time. I'm not terribly sure if he'd be the right person or whether we've got a business partner allocated. James, maybe you would know, but I think that would be very helpful going forward if we could have some time devoted to each committee on the money side of things.
Yes, Chair, we have a finance business partner called Alison McDowell.
Right.
And we meet with Alison roughly once a month.
Right.
But she'll be all over the finance side of things, budgets and what have you.
That would be great. That would be great because you can see, you know, in terms of the information that Grant was referring to about the report and accounts, you can see there's quite a granular kind of understanding of the money aside to it, but we've never really seen that here as a committee. So to get that holistic view, it's really quite important that we have that as an item on the agenda, if that be possible. So yeah, maybe we could extend an invitation to Alison then as a regular attendee of the legal committee. Great. Pauline.
Thanks, Chair. I wondered if it would be possible to extend the first bullet point around data, the priority around data, to not just be about understanding and being more specific about what data we require, but also how we present it and how it's been interpreted. Because I think it's really important. You can obviously get lost in all the data, so it's really important that it's presented well and we're really clear about what we're acquiring from the data and obviously the narrative that goes along with it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think we could probably put in some words into that, couldn't we, to make that? Would that be all right?
I can do that. Yeah, that's no problem.
Yeah, would that be all right, Robin? Right, perfect. I think that's a very good point, though, because yeah, it's all about the understandability and the presentation of it, the narrative. Yeah. Anybody got anything, other reflections on where we are with this? Is everyone content that these are our kind of priorities? I mean, the priorities really are to get this sort of three legs of the stool, if you like, sort of understanding what's in the pipeline, how much is the financial piece of that, and then the organisational learning. I'm not terribly sure how we would organise the organisational learning piece, if that would just be, because obviously it's, as you said earlier, James, it's every line of business appropriately would be learned. But I'm just wondering if it's a more of a people department under Katie, or I'm not terribly sure what would be best there in terms of trying to get that input to every committee to make sure that that is happening at a more sort of strategic level.
Yeah, I think it has to be, and this is what we've discussed in the past, that it has to be at an organisational level, and therefore has to involve a number of different departments, of which quite clearly legal will play a role, saying, look, this is what's happened, this is how much it cost us, and this is how this could have been prevented going forward. I am aware that DCC Spears has raised this as recently as the last People Board that I attended, which was about 6 weeks ago, in Duncan's absence. So there's certainly an appetite from the executive to have an organisational ability to learn from things that have cost us money, to just be as blunt as that. So I agree that there has to be some mechanism to do it. What that mechanism is looking like, I do know is getting attention, but it's definitely seen as a holistic approach, and it's not one, I agree, Chair, that I think can be run directly from this committee or as a result of legal cases. As you'll all be aware, we will become involved when things have gone wrong, and at a stage where we're now into an adversarial system if we can't agree legal settlement. So I agree, and I do know that this is being looked at by the executive. Absolutely,
because anything we be doing kind of in the prevent space has to be welcome. So I wonder then if it would be useful to take as an action then that we invite DCC Spears or somebody from his organisation to attend as a regular attendee to the meetings. Obviously, it would depend on availability of people, but what do you think about that? I'm just clear that we set up for the new year with the right people in the room at every committee, so that we get the right people here. Because if we don't start off the way we need to continue, then we won't. Would you be content with that, James, if we put an invite out to him?
Oh, I'm really sorry, Chair. I didn't realise you were directing that at me.
Sorry. No. I'm just throwing it out there as if we sent an invitation out. It might not be Alan himself, it might be somebody from his org, but just to have that representation in the room at every meeting.
Well, perhaps I could point to the recent meeting of the committee where I asked for settlement in the Jason Peter case.
Yes.
And ACC Payton was at the meeting, and she was able to talk at some length about the learning that has been undertaken as a result of what was going on in the violence reduction unit. These are things that are not immediately obvious to us as lawyers. We're dealing with the court action. So I would certainly have no issues with ACC Payton or somebody from DCC Spears' portfolio being invited to this. Quite clearly, there'll be some meetings where they'll have next to nothing to say.
Yeah, of course.
But where the committee believe that it would be an appropriate invite, I don't see any downside on that, other than maybe people's availability and what have you. But no, I thought the committee were able to be spoken to at length by ACC Payton in the last case, given the amount of learning that was quite clearly coming from that particular case, and I think that was to the benefit of the committee. So I'll stop for breath. You'll be pleased to hear, but I think that I don't really see a downside on that at all.
Well, I agree with you totally. I thought it was great having her there. So yeah, maybe it is ACC Payton, then that would be the right person. Vicky, I don't know whether you wanted to come in on that. Sorry, members, it was just because Vicky put her hand up. Don't know if it's regards this point. You're on mute.
4 years in, I still can't unmute myself on this, but thanks, Chair. Yeah, just to echo James's point there, I'm sure ACC Payton or indeed ACC Stuart Houston would welcome this meeting. I'm actually here to represent Mr. Houston just on a last minute matter that's came to his attention, but I'll convey that message, and if the invite can go out to their offices, and I can speak through it further with them.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Vicky. And Colette, is that okay then to do that?
Absolutely, I'll make sure that that's done, Chair.
Perfect, thanks. Now, over to our members. Grant, who was first? Was it Grant? I think it was Grant.
Well, I actually, what has been said in the last few minutes was covering really what I was going to raise. I think I would very much support having someone from the senior police leadership explaining, bearing in mind what James has mentioned at the start, that if he only hears about things after they've come from P&D or from divisions, how we're actually able to learn as an organisation and stop repeat claims coming through if we possibly can. So it'd be useful to understand what's being done and how it's going to be measured, the effectiveness is going to be measured.
Smashing. Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree. Thanks, Grant. Chris.
Yeah,
it's really helpful discussion. Thank you, Chair. I just, as we've been talking, I guess it's just reinforced for me the extent to which this priority in terms of learning is so important, because it kind of, in governance terms, it kind of answers the so what question in relation to everything else we're discussing. I do wonder, just looking, as we've been talking and hearing the discussion about learning from individual cases, whether or not there's also something there to be gained from not just learning from individual cases, but learning from trend analysis.
Yes, and that's a good point, because that maybe goes back to item, was that 3 that we were looking at in terms of those trends, in terms of that, and maybe having that included as well, because I think that's part of it. Has to be part of it, is looking at the trends and what can we do. I mean, ideally, to get into a prevent space, we have to understand what the root cause of things is, and looking at trends and where we're getting on top of things. So I think that's very, very valid point. And hopefully, I know Pauline's put her hand up already to help James with the presentation, but I'm hoping that we can maybe sort of get that presentational piece right so that we can get a far more granular idea of the sort of trends and be able to spot them. Because that gives us, this whole thing for this focus for this year is all about having that holistic view of the business and being able to be much more assured in terms of the whole thing of what is a big budget item, really. So, yeah. So that's point well made. Anyone else get any? And so if not, are we all content to approve these with the amendments that have been raised already by members? Is that everyone content with that? Smashing. That's fantastic. Thanks, guys. Sorry, my laptop is falling down. Apologies. Trying to do this. So now we're on to the private section of the meeting. So I'll pause there just to let other people leave. I don't know, Colette, is there?
I've just asked for the live